changing. What was once routine merchant traffic through the Baltic and the North Sea has become, in a matter of months, a front line, not of declared war, but of heightened statecraft, shadow operations, and pointed rhetoric that threatens to make those narrow seas far more dangerous than they have been in a generation. Russian officials are now openly discussing the deployment of naval escorts to accompany Russian-flagged commercial vessels through the Baltic Sea, a step they say is aimed at protecting shipping from what Moscow describes as growing Western pressure and encroachments. The argument, as presented by a Russian diplomat speaking to state media, is straightforward. European powers and NATO are treating the Baltic as a testing ground for unilateral mechanisms that would control international navigation and marginalize certain nations. At the same time, Moscow signals it will use a full range of available means, including legal, political, and military resources to ensure the unhindered movement of Russian-flagged vessels. This is not idle talk. The past year has seen a wave of maritime enforcement and interdiction actions across Northern Europe. A coordinated insurance inspection campaign, driven by several European capitals, has focused on the so-called shadow fleet of older tankers and ships that move sanctioned cargoes. In March of this year, Swedish and Belgian forces carried out high-profile boardings and detentions of vessels suspected of sanctions violations and intelligence operations. Those incidents intensified mistrust on all sides, and Moscow has framed some recent NATO maritime initiatives as overtly hostile, even as attempts to impose what Russia calls a blockade. The Kremlin has also moved to reduce legal exposure. Reports indicate Moscow has reflagged a number of tankers to the Russian registry, a legal step intended to claim sovereign protections, in some cases state-linked security elements, described by officials as armed mobile fire groups, connected to an FSB-linked private provider, have been placed aboard higher-value tankers. To Western observers, these measures blur the lines between commercial shipping and state protection, raising the chance of miscalculation at sea. On the other side of the table, London and several northern European capitals are deepening their maritime cooperation outside the formal NATO framework. Britain, together with 9 northern allies, has signalled plans to stand up a new multinational maritime force, drawing members from the Joint Expeditionary Force, including the Netherlands, Nordic countries and the Baltic states. The announcement, delivered by the Royal Navy's chief in public remarks last year, framed the initiative as a pragmatic, regionally focused response to a perceived surge in Russian activity in European waters. The plan is ambitious: to reach full operational integration by 2029 with a single London-based command responsible for the conflict, for Northern Atlantic operations. That proposal marks a strategic shift. Rather than leaving maritime deterrence solely to NATO's 32 nation structures, participants say they want an agile, specialized force capable of rapid regional decisions and, if necessary, kinetic action. To proponents, it is a sensible way to concentrate the political will and naval assets of like-minded nations and to close gaps that larger, slower coalitions sometimes leave exposed. To skeptics, including Moscow, it looks like the formalization of a new Northern European defense bloc, and it has only sharpened the rhetoric on both sides. NATO officials have also raised a separate but connected concern. The presence of Russian warships escorting underinsured, aging tankers increases the risk of a catastrophic environmental disaster. An accident involving a laden tanker escorted by a combatant vessel could spiral into a military confrontation or a long environmental cleanup with enormous economic and ecology. Fickle costs, those risks are amplified in the Baltic, a semi-enclosed sea with narrow shipping lanes and dense coastal populations. Against this evolving maritime backdrop, one European leader has entered the fray with a string of blunt and politically charged public remarks. The leader's tone was combative and unapologetic, mixing geopolitical critique with domestic political calculation. It drew attention to the fragility of the continent's security architecture, warned about the possibility of alliance failure, and framed his own diplomatic outreach as an act of sovereign responsibility. He said, "Anyone is welcome to come to me and explain why they believe I should not be meeting with President Putin. Regardless of that, I am going to meet with him." He added, "Everyone criticizes me beforehand. But when I return from a meeting with Putin, everyone in the toilets in Brussels asks me what he said." Such heroes. Why don't they go and communicate with him themselves? That bluntness, why? feed hand with a wider argument about Europe's security options. What is the answer to a potential NATO collapse? Because in reality, a total NATO collapse could very well happen. Let's not pretend that NATO is immutable or that we cannot easily foresee a situation where the alliance might cease to exist. His point was not merely theoretical. He invoked Article 47 of the European Treaties, a provision that obliges EU members to come to each other's aid if one is attacked by a third state, and used recent history as a reminder that collective security is both fragile and necessary. He argued that national governments must weigh whether they can secure their own safety without the shield of a larger alliance, and he urged caution against unilateral alliance, and he urged caution against unilateral moves away from collective frameworks. We simply cannot ensure such security by ourselves, he said. We are unable to secure it entirely on our own. We can only ever hope to be a part of something larger if we act collectively. At the same time, he questioned the effectiveness of global institutions. What was the original purpose behind the creation of the United Nations in the first place? Well, it was primarily intended to guarantee global peace and deploy military force only when it was absolutely essential to preserve that stability. Honestly, the UN has become nothing more than a total pathetic joke in these modern days. That language, stark and provocative, expresses a deeper frustration shared by leaders who see the old post-war security architecture struggling to adapt to 21st century crises. He also engaged directly with the gruesome arithmetic of modern warfare. Recalling remarks made by other leaders about battlefield casualties, he said he was skeptical of inflated figures, but he also used those numbers to underscore the human cost of a conflict that shows no easy military solution. I hope I remember the number correctly, that there was a month recently this year where 35,000 Russian and soldiers were taken out, meaning either dead or severely wounded. I really don't mean to question your figures, but it honestly strikes me as a rather exaggerated number. He then ran through the hypothetical math, tens of thousands a month, hundreds of thousands a year, and invoked the scale of national tragedy such losses would represent. On policy, he argued that current Western strategies could be self-perpetuating. The dominant view in several capitals is that sustaining pressure and funding will weaken one side economically and create leverage. He was blunt in rejecting that as a likely path to negotiated peace. There is a prevailing strategy, my dear colleague, which suggests that peace negotiations will supposedly only take place once one of the sides has become so incredibly weak that they will have no choice but to agree to talk, he said. But honestly, when will anyone ever actually admit that they are weak enough to finally agree to such negotiations? That is précis. I see why, in my humble opinion, we are still in for a rather long and drawn-out military conflict. What stands out in these remarks is the interplay between national skepticism of collective institutions and the pragmatic need to remain engaged. He made clear he intends to pursue direct talks, regardless of the political cost, at home or the criticism of peers. Anyone is welcome to come to me and explain why they believe I should not be meeting with President Putin. Regardless of that, I am going to meet with him. For him, diplomacy, even with a geopolitical rival, is an exercise in national interest and a hedge against further escalation. Beyond diplomacy, there are broader economic and geopolitical signals. The leader described an outward-looking economic strategy, reaching to markets in Africa, Central Asia, and Asia to diversify trade and investment. As Western opportunities narrow, he cited visits to countries such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Vietnam, China, and Brazil as part of a bid to expand partnerships. The message was clear. In a polarized international environment, smaller states are forced to navigate a complex map of relationships, balancing security dependencies with economic necessities. Domestically, these positions resonate in different ways. Calls for neutrality or for referenda on neutrality, as has been debated in neighboring countries, speak to the political divides opened by prolonged great power competition. The leader warned against rash moves away from collective defense without a sober assessment of realistic alternatives, and he cautioned that banding together remained the safest course in the current moment of uncertainty. Back at sea, the practical implications are potentially severe. The Russian consideration of naval escorts, Western inspections and interdictions, the reflagging of vessels, and the stand-up of a regional maritime force all add new layers of operational risk. Each action feeds public narratives on both sides that can be used to justify further measures. That dynamic tit-for-tat escalation in a grey zone between war and peace is precisely what political and military planners worry about. The Baltic and North Sea are crowded with civilian traffic, fisheries, undersea infrastructure, and ecologically sensitive coastlines. A miscalculation there could produce consequences that ripple far beyond a single diplomatic spat. There is, however, a simultaneous thread of restraint in the public pronouncements on every side. Russian officials insist escorts are defensive. Western leaders argue their actions are lawful and necessary. The proposed new multinational maritime force is presented as a defense-oriented interoperability project, not a warfighting coalition. Yet words on paper and command structures in practice sometimes diverge, especially under the pressure of crises. That tension between intent and effect is what makes the current moment so volatile. For policymakers, the central task is to reduce the risks of accidental escalation while preserving credible deterrence. That requires clear rules of engagement, rapid communication channels at sea, robust environmental safeguards around risky commercial shipping, and political dialogue that keeps diplomatic options open even as both sides posture. It also means being mindful of how domestic politics can shape and sometimes distort foreign policy choices. As Northern European capitals move to formalize new maritime arrangements and as Moscow experiments with new forms of protection for its shipping, the seas between them may become a crucible for a larger strategic competition. Whether that competition remains constrained or slides into direct confrontation will depend on choices made in government offices, on naval bridges, and in backroom diplomacy in the weeks and months to come. The leader who spoke bluntly about alliances, the United Nations, and the necessity of talking to rivals summed up the pat. Paradox facing Europe today. We simply cannot ensure such security by ourselves. We are unable to secure it entirely on our own. We can only ever hope to be a part of something larger if we act collectively. Those words are at once a caution and an appeal. A reminder that in an era of fragile institutions and renewed rivalry, collective security remains both the continent's oldest promise and its most urgent challenge. The coming months will test whether Europe can navigate these waters with restraint. The routes are the same as they have always been: narrow straits, busy approaches, and densely populated coasts. But the political climate that frames them is anything but routine. For seafarers and citizens alike, the hope must be that prudence, communication, and a recognition of shared risks prevail over bravado and unilateralism. The alternative on a crowded sea is an error no one can afford.